Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. I am so pumped to have you here today because we're going on a hands-on guided radiologist tour. We're going to completely bypass all that dense medical jargon and look straight at the evidence. We're talking about bone density today, and specifically, we're going to learn how to actually read the hidden language of our skeletal system using real diagnostic imagery. Let's just jump right into it. So, what do your bones actually reveal? When most of us look at an x-ray, we just see these cloudy, kind of ghostly shadows on a black screen. It feels a bit like looking at an abstract painting, right? But to a trained eye, these images are incredibly precise maps. They tell this vivid story about your body's structural integrity, revealing secrets about your health that are totally invisible from the outside. So today, we are going to train our eyes to read that exact story. All right, part 1. Inside the human foot. The foundation.
Okay, let's dive into this. The human foot is an absolute marvel of engineering. I mean, it supports our entire body weight while keeping us flexible enough to walk, run, jump, the whole shebang. Looking at this lateral or side view, you can immediately see the general structure forming the arch. Now, toward the bottom left, check out that massive foundational block. That's the heel bone, or the calcaneus. Notice how it completely anchors the back of the foot, connecting through a series of smaller, puzzle-like midfoot bones, all the way down to the long bones of the toes pointing upward. It's just a fantastic profile shot of our body's foundation.
And this brilliantly illustrates why a single image is just never enough. On the left, we've got our side profile, and on the right, a top-down view. Doctors absolutely rely on multiple angles like this to assess three-dimensional density because, the foot isn't a flat piece of paper. It's a really complex 3D structure. To truly gauge how dense and strong these bones are, we have to cross-reference these perspectives so we can see the overlapping layers of bone tissue from literally every side. Moving on to Section 2, reading the bone shadows, shells, and sponges. So to really understand bone density, we got to understand the image itself. X-ray technology basically fires harmless radiation through the foot. The really dense stuff, like bone, blocks the rays, creating those stark white areas you see. The less dense areas let the rays pass right through, and those show up as darker gray or black. To read this map, we use a super simple two-step process based on a pretty handy analogy. Think of your bone like a hard shell filled with a delicate sponge. Step 1, check those bright white outer edges. That's the dense outer bone, the shell, technically called the cortex. Step 2, look inside that white outline at the grayish, textured patterns. That is your inner bone, the sponge, which is known as trabecular bone. All right, applying this top-down view to the long bones of the toes, the metatarsals, direct your eyes right to the middle of those long shafts. Do you see those thick, solid, bright white lines running down the left and right sides? Yep, that's your thick outer cortex, the shell. Now, look right between those white lines. See that fainter, kind of web-like, slightly gray texture filling the center? That's the trabeculae, your sponge. Section 3, identifying signs of osteopenia, the visual clues. Now, this is where things get really interesting. Because what happens when the balance in that bone architecture shifts? Sometimes that inner sponge starts to look a bit different. It actually starts losing its density. And those stark contrasts we just learned to spot, they begin to change. This visual shift leads us straight to our core concept today, osteopenia. Basically, osteopenia is a condition where your bone mineral density is lower than normal, but it just hasn't reached that severe, brittle stage we classify as osteoporosis quite yet. Think of it as a midway point, right? Kind of an early warning indicator. The sponge is getting a bit thinner, and the shell might be losing a fraction of its solid brightness. Let's see exactly how this presents on an actual scan. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the visual evidence of osteopenia actually appears. Look really closely at this oblique, top-down view. Just kind of scan your eyes across the midfoot, that cluster of squarish bones, and then up into the long toe bones. Compared to a healthy, highly dense bone, you can clearly see these faint, overly dark patches. These areas look a bit washed out or even increasingly translucent. So where we should be seeing a robust, light gray sponge, we are instead seeing these darker, hollower-looking shadows. And that darkness, that signifies lower bone mass. Let's bring our attention back to the side view to really confirm this. Specifically, zoom in on that large heel bone down at the bottom left. Remember, the heel bone is primarily made up of that inner spongy trabecular bone. Because of the osteopenia, if you look at the internal web of this calcaneus, it just looks sparser, it looks faded. That intricate, tight cross-hatching of the bone sponge is essentially losing its stark white contrast, letting way more of the dark background bleed right through. This is exactly what the subtle loss of density looks like in real life.
Which brings us to Section 4, your bone's hidden story, the takeaway.
We've spent this explainer looking pretty closely at the foot, right? But these visual clues absolutely apply to your entire skeleton. Understanding how to look at an X-ray, actually seeing the shells, the sponges, and those washed out shadows, it gives us profound insight into our invisible structural foundation. So, the crucial point is this. Your bones are absolutely not just dead scaffolding holding you up. They're dynamic, living records. They are constantly breaking down and rebuilding themselves. When we look at an image showing osteopenia, we're literally looking at a snapshot in time where the breaking down is slightly outpacing the rebuilding. X-rays brilliantly capture this silent, ongoing story of that density, which leaves us with a totally fascinating question to ponder. Since these shifts in density have absolutely no symptoms you can feel, what silent, invisible changes are happening in your own structural foundation right now? Your skeletal health is basically this hidden universe, operating every single second of your life right beneath the surface. Thank you so much for joining me on this visual deep dive today. Keep exploring.